to put something out there, but I wasn't really sure what to do. I feel I just rambled again. Everybody seems to dislike that anyway, right? I need filler on here somewhere. Some of my paranoid delusions and conspiracy theories, they seem to go over not very well. I alienate people everywhere I go with them. I mean, has anybody noticed all these foreign invaders? Yeah? Well, I couldn't help noticing that you'll hear like Democrats say stuff like, well, these people have to pick our crops and, wash our clothes and shit like that. All right, so they're looking for slaves again. I get that. But they really just want to enslave all of us. It's obvious from their policies. But they say that knowing full well that probably a good 80 or 90% of the foreign invaders that come here position themselves strategically in cities that have major trade ports, riverways, and rail hubs. And I don't think anybody realizes this, or they're ignoring it, or they're I don't know, is the media omitting it because they're all working together in it? Like I think there are just forces that wanted to destroy the United States that are in here, and the reason why they're in here the way they are is because there's no way you could take us by force from the outside. Navy's too strong, we have too many armed citizens, there's just no way to do it. But if you flood enough foreign nationals into major cities, which are always the population hubs anyway that control most elections, and you create enough people in each state to boost the census so they get more seats in Congress, they can take it over from within. They can take the country from its governing point and pretty much just turn common Americans, or people who actually are American, into the outlaws. And I'm just at that point where I'm like, is it too late to have a revolution? Are there too many foreign factions here embedded into too many strategic locations that, should we decide to fight the powers that be, at the first sign of instability, are these foreign factions just going to take over the cities where they are and take those trade ports at that time? Or those rail hubs, or those... Yeah, because the first step in any war is you want to either disable or control the economic resources of your target. So I'm a little paranoid about this. And when I think of that, I mean, it makes sense that the Democratic Party went that direction, because that is a party that, people seem to ignore this. I know they omit a lot of it in school, but if you really actually understand our history, it's not just knowing sociology, it's comprehending it. The Democratic Party was formed as an opposition to the Republic. They're technically the first enemy of the Republic. Not the first enemy necessarily of the United States as a country, but of the Republic. Like once the Constitution's fully ratified by, 1792? At that point, the parties divide up. They have their different ideological differences, but ultimately the Republican Party is formed shortly after the Democratic Party in a response, because the Democratic Party, there are people that they wanted a democracy, but they wanted a limited representative democracy, in the sense that only like landlords were going to be allowed to have any sort of representation. But the idea was the aristocracy was going to control everybody, which to some extent they do now anyway, because people keep relenting control to them. I mean, they keep asking or demanding things from the government that a government is just not meant to do. It's just not. I don't mean to hurt everyone's feelings. Yes, I do. I don't give a shit if it hurts people's feelings. There are enough resources here, and markets can provide for us. You just have to participate in the markets. That's what capitalism is. Your participation will determine what your outcome is and what your prosperity will be. To some degree. There's, of course, there's chance, there's luck, there's many other things involved. But the more we keep asking for things from the government, whether it be health care or special rights for certain groups of people, the more control we keep giving them, the more control they keep taking. And that hasn't been helping us at all. It's been leaving us weak because they clearly have no trouble selling us out to foreign enemies or foreign interest, which is simply people who want control of what we have. In the 70s, we got heavily invested into the Mideast. It was on its way there before that, but Carter gave them a lot, or at least his administration, or the Congress under his administration. I mean, any way you want to look at the government. Our government sold us out to many of the nations of the Mideast in the interest of global trade, in hopes to boost not our economy, by the way, because if you remember, the 70s was not great economically for the United States, but to boost the power or control of the federal government, a centralized government, as they want. Just like these socialists or communists or whatever they want to call themselves. I don't care what your brand name is. It's always about centralized control. They'll say it's collective, but it's really a committee, right? Because I say it all the time. Socialism is just a rebranding of serfdom. I believe it came about at the fall of the monarchs. They had your communist or socialist revolutions in Eastern Europe mostly. The monarchs fell. People forget, who financed those revolutions. They were, of course, who would later be known as the oligarchs, but then they were probably known as the lords or whatever the rank was amongst that civil order at the time. English had their lords, their landlords. There were people really that were permitted by the monarchs to control certain resources. And I think when those revolutions took place, they were mostly those people didn't want the monarchs to decide what their dividends were anymore. I'm using monarchs loosely, of course. But so they formed committees instead. And then they used commoners and suckered them into fighting a fight. And they used terms like, equal equity for the working class, which really meant no equity for the working class. And they get whatever equal dividends that, the oligarchs, as they became, decided for them. And I see people coming out of colleges buying into the socialism narrative. And it's like, how do you buy into that? Don't you realize you're going to a school owned by oligarchs and administrated by their bourgeoisie? There, I use their language. I hope they're happy. And yet you're falling for it. And one of the first things, one of the rules of the communist and the socialist and all these books is to accuse your enemy of what you are doing. So it's funny. It's like they literally they put it right out in front of them. It's as transparent as all get out, and at the same time, people just fall for it over and over again. And we had a very different system of governance here because it was really a new land, even though it had been already conquered on the coastlines at the time that we became our own country here in the United States. They were expanding outward, and it was very hard to create that expansion when there's still a lot of unknown nations that had to be conquered along the way, and there was still a lot of, let's just say, the forefathers were smart enough to not make the same mistakes they did in Europe. And if you ever look at a map of Europe over several hundred years, the territories changed hands a lot of times between the tribes over there, which was happening over here long before the United States was formed. People always like, we stole the land. Nobody stole. Land is purchased or it's conquered. That's how countries are formed throughout all of human history. It's purchased or it's conquered. You do have marauding tribes too, or nomadic nations that just kind of barrel through, take what they want, and they move on to the next. That's happened too. But over the course of thousands of years before, the history of the European explorations that came over here, the people here were just taking land and resources from each other as well. And yes, of course, they had their coalitions and their confederacies amongst them at different times, and they fought with the others and everything else like that. So that whole narrative that somehow we're magically Europeans come by and suddenly they're magically more powerful than everybody else and just swoosh them aside. It didn't happen that easily either. If the nations here were united, or at least had a greater resolve or whatever, or chose to develop their technologies differently, and weren't in their own orders were not corrupt. Don't think they didn't have corrupt politicians just because, they had a different tribal order. There's always corruption. If they didn't have that, there's no way that the newer settlements would have been able to, take ground and everything else. Like they were massively outnumbered in many of these regions. And the technology wasn't all that grand by comparison, believe me. It takes a lot less time to load a bow than it does a musket. And their effective range isn't much different either. Sure, one's louder and scarier, but where was I going with this? I don't know, I'm just rambling. Just trying to put something out there. But I do notice, there's a bigger picture that people keep overlooking. The foreign invaders, the migrants, they call them, right? The migrants. Oh, please. This frustrates me too, because, all right, you really want to analyze it from a sociological perspective. Man, I could talk today, huh? The United States is enduring an invasion from multiple factions at greater numbers than any other nation has ever endured throughout all of human history. If it's true that it's upwards of 10 million people, because there weren't that many Mongols, the Roman armies weren't that big, neither were the Grecians or the Egyptians, nobody was that big. And these people are smart, they didn't just hit us head on like they're going to try to fight us, because they can't. They infiltrated. They jumped the fence, infiltrated the communities, took over territories where they are, and they lay low. And then they work their way into the political system. They don't have to fire a shot. After a while, they just make it against the law to be American. So, what do? We just keep surrendering territory? Like, I'm here in Virginia. What am I supposed to do? Just abandon it because the current anti-United States Democratic forces have taken over and they're just outlawing pretty much being American? Because that's what I see. They want to tax us to pay for the foreign invasion, and then they wrote unlawful legislation against all of our firearms or any sort of means of defense. Which that in itself is egregious in so many ways, because, it's not just a means of defense. Firearms are a part of American culture. They have been since the inception of the nation. Without them, we'd have no nation. So they're outlawing American culture, while they're telling us we can't criticize the foreign cultures that have invaded. I don't know who's voting for this. I assume it's people who go to college, College is owned by the oligarchs and administered by the bourgeoisie. They're trained to hate America because they think we stole this land. Which is really a shame, because they're taught to hate themselves, right? Isn't that what the whole transgender thing dips in? Is gender dysphoria not a disdain for one's physical self? And is gender confirmation not an affirmation for self-loathing, right? When someone believes they're of a gender that they are not, it's telling them that, no, it's okay, you should hate yourself. You should pretend to be something else entirely. But whatever it is, you should hate that. And that's what I get out of the whole left-wing campaign of everything. It's demoralization, segregation, and economic subjugation. Over and over and over again. And you can see it historically, whether you're looking at the way they did it over in Europe before here. I don't think the socialism took so long to get here, specifically because, like I was saying, this nation was founded differently. We broke away from the monarchies and started a different system of government because we knew the territory was too big, even with 13, colonies or states at that time. They became states. Each state was a country unto itself. bound as the United States under a cultural accord we know as the United States Constitution, or the Constitution of the United States. Whichever title you want to use. I don't know, you understand what I'm saying. So, but obviously the Democratic Party did not want that cultural accord. That's why they formed their Confederacy, and they formed their own Articles of Confederacy or Constitution, and it was much different. And the Democratic Party, as it stands, is the world's oldest and wealthiest remaining political party, or consistently remaining political party. And they are a global faction. See, that's where it differed too, because the Democratic Party and the principles of it started over in Europe. They are ideas that were principled in Europe. They were in opposition to what this country was becoming from the get-go. Think of them as the loyalists to the British during the Revolution, but the ones that knew that the tide was not going to be in their favor. So they, of course, went with the direction of the new republic long enough to, cede their influence and then, try to succeed from that. And then along the way, of course, they duped, commoners into following them, and hence we have the Civil War, because these people didn't want to give up, pretty much. I mean, people say that it's not about slavery. It was about slavery. It was kind of like the last straw at that point, because without slaves, then they would have to come up with some sort of competitive salaries, and the profit margin would not be as large on their thing. So, no, slaves did not build the nation, but they did keep a select few very wealthy. So, if anything, they held back the country. Well, not they, but the slavers. Because, of course, plantation owners, as they may be, or may have been, they didn't have to offer a competitive wage or higher pay, or other. They only had to have a consistent, this is important, a consistent dividend to give to their laborers. What did a slave get? I'll wait. So I can smoke my cigar a little. Well, a slave got housing. They got enough food, enough water, and enough health care to keep them working, to keep them laboring. Now, what does it sound like? Come on, the bell's ringing. Sounds an awful lot like socialism, doesn't it? Isn't that what socialism is? Equal dividends or equal equity amongst the working class? They don't say against everybody. They say, amongst everybody, rather. They say amongst the collective or the working classes is generally the terms they use. And, those people, yes, they are anti-king. They're anti-monarchs, of course, because they've given up the kings for committees. And those committees often give in to dictators in the end anyway, because they usually go with whoever is able to incite the populace into, following. Because they want followers, right? They want people who are subservient. You have to be able to surrender your own liberties for the collective. So I like when people curse nationalism because it has an association with fascism, in spite of the fact that fascism was really historically just another brand of socialism. They just referred to it as, they had a strong sense of nationalism, which is no different than saying have a strong sense of collectivism, really. Both of them have world conquest in mind in the end anyway. So, because they want to institute that for everybody. So I don't get caught up in all the semantics of everything. But to get back to what I started this on, really, was what I'm concerned about is why are we surrendering territory to foreign invaders? And is it too late to just take it back by force if we can't win the elections? Because I believe that as far as people who should be lawfully allowed to participate in elections, we outnumber them by a great deal. I'm not talking about national elections, the president and stuff like that. I understand foreigners not allowed to vote in that, despite the fact that apparently dead people can. But the local stuff, they let foreign nationals vote in a lot of local elections. Unlawful occupants as well. Invaders. An invader to me is an unlawful occupant, an illegal alien. That's an invader. You are invading. If you didn't knock on the door and ask permission to come in, then you've invaded. Sneaking in is no different than forcing your way in. Can't convince me otherwise. So that's a big issue. And I don't know how to convince even some of my friends who had just died the whole Democrat at this point. And I keep pointing out Democrat. We know there's Republicans that are involved in this too. They cave. They think they're going to earn points with a percentage of an electorate that may already lean Democrat. But let's face it, things are so polarized now. Are there really any people who vote Democrat that are going to flip the other way? That have any sense at all? The ones that could look past the hate campaigns, right? Because Democrats have a really strong hate campaign. It's what they always campaign on is hate. Hate this group of people, hate that guy, hate the conservatives, hate the Christians, hate the males, hate the patriarchy, hate the Donald Trump, hate the anybody associated with these people. It's always a hate campaign. And then they turn around and say that, the other side's the one that's hateful. But I don't hear the other side saying anybody's hateful. All they do is bring up things that are nonsensical when they're criticizing the Democratic Party. What doesn't make sense? And people are like, that's hateful rhetoric. Is it? Or is it just, fair comprehension? Not telling you to hate anybody. I don't want anybody to get hurt. Don't hurt anybody. I mean, it's really that simple. You can't rely on government to determine what our civil discourse is with people either. People have to figure that out for themselves. They always did. And we have our basic set of laws that say you're not allowed to hurt somebody. You can't physically hurt somebody. That's enough. We should be allowed to say what we have to say as far as words go. And I get in a professional environment, you're at work, you don't want to get into arguments about stupid stuff. But because it disrupts the work environment, at that time you're being paid to do something other than argue with somebody. So, I guess that's mostly my ramble today. That's my porch today. This is the view from my porch, so it's the mailbox and the road, and just out here in rural Virginia. Smoking a cigar, minding my P's and Q's. I still don't know what that means, really, but I can comprehend a lot of stuff. It doesn't mean I have to know everything. We know who the bad Republicans are, and if you don't find out who's voting on the wrong side of things, and you got to primary those people, get them out of there. We need new candidates. If a single person listens to this and gets something out of it and passes it on to somebody else, please do. I mean, I would like to at least get people more active in fixing the problem. Everybody feels like they don't have, like their vote doesn't count, they don't have an opportunity to. Now, what we need is more regular people to involve themselves in the political landscape before we cannot anymore. There are plenty of ways to raise funds nowadays. I mean, heck, you got, there were literally kids on YouTube making over $1 million a year playing video games and talking there just a few years back, right? There's GoFundMes. There's all kinds of shit out there, right? There are more ways to market yourself to make money now than there ever were at any other point in history of this country. And that's why I don't understand why people would want to surrender that to, some greater governance to determine what their dividends should be at this point in time. It makes no sense to me at all. Although it does make sense that that's why they're being so aggressive about going after everybody right now. They've always let it trickle in, they indoctrinate you with the education system, and the messages are snuck into all your TV shows and your movies, but they're more and more aggressive as time goes on with it, more and more just hammering it home, because if you can indoctrinate 3 generations, then eventually there's nobody left that even remembers what the country was supposed to be to begin with, and it makes it that much easier for them to believe everything that they're hearing. But someone's got to open their eyes to see that the markets have grown. There are so many different ways to do different things, to market yourself, to create markets, to participate in the market. I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm just talking about the labor market itself. Just, provide a service. Provide a, even as your personality. If you got good looks, use that. That's an asset. You do what you got to do. The point is you find your own path to prosperity and don't expect the government to decide what your dividend should be. Because once enough of us have decided that, believe me, those dividends get smaller. Because after all, what's in it for them? And I do believe that there are politicians out there that are they don't have to be the wealthiest person on the planet. I think you reach a certain level of wealth where what else do you really want to buy? Because do you really want to have everything? You don't have time for everything. But isn't power all that much more enticing? Like some people would rather have the control than they would the money. Especially if you're in politics, these people don't have to pay for anything, right? Senators, congressmen, governors, mayors, whatever, they drive around on your dime. I'm not just talking about their salary, their security, their transportation, their, often their food, all that stuff. They don't have to spend their own money that they're making in there, which makes it all that much more comical that here in Virginia, I think they just gave themselves, pretty much the whole government gave themselves 150% raise right after this new governor got in. I don't know, Spanberger. I just don't think I should say the name. I don't understand why Virginians voted in somebody from New Jersey anyway to run their state. I think they should have grabbed somebody probably closer to a rural area to begin with. I think your governance should always be a little bit more conservative so you can live your life a little more liberally. You know what I mean? Conservatives tend to have less laws, less restrictions, less taxes, less. It allows you more control over your life. And at heart, I think most people are kind of liberal in the sense that they just want to be left alone to do their own thing. And they're accepting, and most people are accepting of what other people are doing as long as it's not affecting what they're able to do. Because isn't that what happens with the modern liberal? They don't just want to be identified this way or do this, whatever. They want you to participate in their lie. I'm a different gender. I'm they come out there, don't misgender me. All right, you want me? I'm not going to participate in their lie. They want to lie to themselves. They want to pretend to be whatever else like that. At the end of the day, we are all of a different identity everywhere we go. To that degree, identity is fluid. When you think about it, your sex isn't, but your identity is. Because right now, I'm just some moron rambling on YouTube. That's my identity, right? It's the Ironsides channel. You might know me as Pete. But, I walk into a delicatessen and order a sandwich. I'm the guy ordering a sandwich. That's my identity at that moment. I'm fixing your car. Well, I'm the guy fixing your car. We do it all the time. Once a week, the garbage man comes. That's his identity for that day or at that moment. Your identity changes moment to moment depending upon what the situation is amongst people who don't otherwise know you. The best you can do is portray who you want people to see. And if they see it, then so be it. And if they don't, oh well. You're going to get on with your life just fine. Too many crossover topics, I know. I wasn't going to do that. I was going to kind of split it up into different, 10-minute videos of different topics. So I get more content out there. But the problem is I ramble, man. I just ramble. It's what I do. Let me tell you, great fun at parties. All right, so y'all have a great night. I know no one's going to watch this anyway. That's why I have some kind of confidence in putting it out there. Nobody watches this. If they did, I'd have more subscribers or at least a couple more likes or dislikes on there, right? Put a comment down there if you did see it. And thank you.